Thanks, everyone. David Kleeman and I are both senior fellows at the Fred Rogers Center. I love to evoke Fred at these kinds of gatherings because I think it's a good reminder about how you connect what we know about child development with technology. Fred said, let's not get so fascinated by what the technology can do that we forget what it can't do. It's through relationships that we grow best and learn best. I think it's a good reminder for all of us that in the early years, it's all about relationships first. We have to beware of the either-or false dichotomy. It can be we are family and we are family. It's possible to have both. It's possible to have technology and non-technology. It's okay to read Goodnight Moon and to read Goodnight iPad. It's actually okay to enjoy both. This is not always the case in the field that I come from in early care and education, where there's lots of concern about technology and whether technology is the right way for young children to learn about their world. Well, it's been a busy month, last 30 days or so. I'm going to talk about a research roundtable that happened in Washington, Digital Media and Early Learning, what we know and what we need to know. The title of my presentation, really carrying some ideas forward for you. Some research that just came out, Skype Me, socially contingent interactions help toddlers learn language. Hold on to that phrase, socially contingent interactions. The Common Sense Media Report, which a number of people have already talked about, and I'm just going to quickly hit a couple of highlights on that. American Academy of Pediatrics last week updated their policy statement. I think this is important for all of us. And recently, pediatrician researcher Dimitri Kostakis had an interview that also suggests some shifts in the way AAP is thinking about these things. So I called it the perfect storm. Lisa Guernsey hosted at the New America Foundation this meeting, Digital Media and Early Learning. The Alliance for Early Learning in a Digital Age is these organizations that you see on the screen. Fred Rogers Center, Sesame Street, Cooney Center at Sesame Workshop, Erikson Tech Center, that's me, PBS, and the Autism Prevention. We came together at the Clinton Global Initiative 2 years ago, met again this past year. I think there's some power in bringing these organizations together into one conversation. No matter what else this alliance does, the fact that we have gathered around the table many times to talk about what we're thinking around digital media and young children, I think has power in it. But one of the things we said we would do was to gather researchers together to think about what do we know and what do we still need to know about digital media. I'm calling this the A-Team. I know there's a lot on the screen. I won't read through the names, but there's some digital media and young children researchers that were represented at this meeting that I think were among the top thinkers in our field, have been doing this work for a long, long time. Some of these folks have been at this since early Sesame Street days and beyond. So we got some good people in the room, and we had them think hard about what do we already know. Lisa Guernsey has kind of framed this in this is the 3 C's of digital media and early learning: content, context, and child. I think this is also something really nice to hold on to. This is a takeaway when I present to early childhood educators. I want them to take away the 3 C's. No matter what else you remember from the day, remember the 3 C's. Because this is very comfortable to us. This is the way we think. Content, context, and child. What we were talking about at the meeting was content as the active ingredient. What are the features that make an impact on children's learning? What helps learning? What hurts learning? Really what we've been talking about. What's dust, what's magic? The context, or the together vision. What do we know about joint media engagement with digital media? What makes a difference? What doesn't? And then the child. What do we know about the individual needs, interests, abilities, learning preferences, and background of the individual child? Because ultimately that's who's holding on to the device. We need to recognize family diversity, understanding the needs of various learning settings, and matching the media to the needs of the child. What works and what doesn't when we think about the individual child. So those were our challenges to the researchers to address. So what do we know? What were some of the big takeaways from the day? Parents need to know that just as with books, using media together with their children leads to more learning. Joint engagement with media matters. We have to help parents understand that. It's really quite simple, right? When you do this with your child, it makes a difference. It makes a positive difference. Joint engagement with media matters. Implications for all of us in the room is, so how do we promote that? How do we prompt that? How do we encourage it? How do we enable it? For screen-based media, the content on the screen really matters. That should be comforting to all of you who are developers. Your content matters. Active ingredients matter, including characters who children build relationships with. I'll talk about this a little more in a moment. Elements that promote guided play. This came up again and again and again as a key issue is the guided play. We've had this conversation in the room as well. How much guiding is enough? How much is too much? When are we in the way? When is the voice in the way? When do we just let the child experience? And the idea of avoidance of distractions. And I think this is an important one as well. Just because we can put it on the screen doesn't mean we should. We need to be thinking about what encourages and moves the child's learning forward. And then children are invested in active environments when they're engaged in meaningful, interactive, and social contexts. And back to the social context. And I know I'm an early childhood person, and I led with Fred saying relationships matter, but they do. And this is critical. And we have to think of this as a social experience for young children, not an isolated one child on one screen experience. There's plenty of times when that is the experience, but it still happens in a larger context. The context matters. The use of the media depends greatly on children's interests and needs, and families' needs, backgrounds, languages, and cultures. This gets complicated. It's messy. One of the things at the Erikson Institute that we talk about all the time is the complexity of human development. You can't isolate any one variable and expect to understand a child. It all happens within lots of contexts. So we need to be thinking about that. The context for individual child development and the family media ecology, how families see media, use media, understand media, how much background TV is in the house, how purposeful and meaningful are the uses of media in the family. Providing access to quality media and quality media environments requires engaging parents in a diversity of settings, including public libraries. I think this is an important one. Some of the work we're doing at the Tech Center in Erikson right now that we're most excited about is with informal learning settings. What's the implications of digital media, young children and parents when they walk into the children's library, when they come to the children's museum, when they go to the zoo or the nature center? There's an intersection there that's really interesting and powerful because parents are self-selecting to go there. They're going to the library with their child on purpose. So what's the moment there that we could use with them? And then young children are capable of creating their own messages and expressing themselves through the media. Child control and the progression from consuming media to meaning making and creating media matters. And we all know that. We've talked about that a lot. So back to the relationship matters piece. Media use in the context of the adult-child relationship and the child-child relationship. Socially contingent responsive interactions, some work by Kathy Hirsch-Pasek and others that are showing that toddlers can learn language via Skype when the person on the other end of the Skype conversation is grandma or grandpa or someone who matters to them. A father who's away from home, a mother who's away. So we start to realize that screen learning can happen for young children. It happens best when we add that relationship piece into it. Again, guided play, pro-social behaviors. We're hearing a lot of conversation around how can this encourage pro-social behavior among children. Parasocial relationships is this idea, again, Sandy Calvert, about how children create relationships with characters on the screen. Interesting challenge for you. It's one thing to develop a relationship with Grover over time from watching Sesame Street for many years. It's another to have your app in front of me for the first time with a character and create a relationship. So we need to think about that. Issues around co-viewing and again the idea of joint engagement with media. So Kathy Hirsch-Pasek said, tweet this, humans learn best in active, engaged, meaningful, and interactive contexts. There's mountains of data to support this claim. Whether the platform is digital or traditional, electronic or paper, the results are the same. The potential of digital media for learning is enormous if we do it right. If we do it right. The potential for digital media to not support healthy child development is also enormous when we do it wrong. We have to understand both sides of that. Heather Krikorian from the University of Wisconsin-Madison said, young children are still developing the cognitive skills that are necessary to learn from screen media. So the social context is particularly important to them. This is really important to understand when we're thinking about toddlers, 2s and 3s, learning from screen media. The social context becomes critical. We're still understanding how the screen works. And Sandy Calvert said about parasocial relationships, the meaningful parasocial relationships that children create with media characters can influence developmental outcomes in positive or negative ways. The direction of that influence depends on how we choose to use media characters in children's lives. How you choose to use media characters in children's lives. You have a lot of responsibility. You're making decisions about the directionality of that effect, and that's important to really consider. Be intentional about this. When we talk to early childhood teachers about selecting technology, we talk about intentionality being critical. Don't just know what you're choosing, know why. Why is this the right technology for this child at this particular time, for this particular learning goal or outcome? So intentionality in your design is critical as well. Common sense media, we heard about this. I'm going to just kind of quickly go through this. Lots of increase in media use by young children since 2011, no surprise there. Tablet ownership is up. Tablet ownership by children is up dramatically as well. 38% of infants and toddlers used a mobile device, up from 10% in 2011. So the youngest children are holding on to these things and are using them. Despite the fact that the American Academy of Pediatrics has been saying for a long time, we ought to not have screen time for the youngest children. They're already in their hands. If they're already in their hands, we can argue about whether they should be in their hands or not. We ought to do something with the time they're spending with the device in their hands. That's the more interesting question for me. Television and video game use is down. We heard this talked about yesterday, more than a half-hour a day for children. This is interesting to think about. The average amount of time children spend using mobile devices has tripled from 5 minutes a day to an average use of 15 minutes a day. Yesterday, someone mentioned all of the different screens that are in your lives. I always challenge early childhood educators, when you leave the room today, count screens. Between now and when you go to bed tonight, how many screens do you confront? Because that's the number of screens kids are confronting in the world as well. Right? From the bus we're going to ride up to the airport and at the airport and on. Screens are everywhere. So when you think of screen time, we really have to think about it differently. Access to mobile media among poor and minority children is much higher than it was. So we're seeing an increase 2 years ago, but a digital divide still persists. And if the access point is a smartphone, then that little screen is very different than this screen or the iPad screen or any of the touch screens over on the side. How do we deliver content? And if the only access point is one smartphone in a family, that's your internet access point. How much time is a child actually spending on that screen in any kind of meaningful educational way? American Academy of Pediatrics, new policy statement. TV and new media are a dominant force in children's lives. Thank you, AAP, we didn't know that. But they're still very concerned about potential harmful effects of media messages. So am I. So is everybody in the room. We're all concerned about that. The AAP does not hold the only concern, right? We all are concerned about harmful messages and inappropriate use of media with young children. Let's all accept that nobody wants to do harm to children. That's that false dichotomy. We're all in this together to do right for children. Recognize positive and pro-social effects of media use. This is a huge shift. If you've been watching the AAP at all, if you've read the statements over the years, this is a huge shift. It's the first time in my reading of anything they've written where they're saying, there actually might be positive effects here. And particularly emphasizing pro-social, which I find interesting as well. So this is what they're really focusing on. They're encouraging parents to establish a family home use plan for all media. Kids can learn many positive things from pro-social media. The key is to teach children to make healthy media choices from healthychildren.org, which is on the AAP website. So helping children to make healthy choices, digital media literacy for young children. What's your role as a developer, since you've got their time and attention on your screen, in helping them learn to be digitally media literate? Content matters. Lots of controversy over the years about Christakis and his work. What I find interesting is Christakis has the attention of the media and has the attention of the AAP. So when he starts to shift, we have to pay attention to the shift. And his shift is all media is educational, so we need to be aware of what children are being educated about. All media is educational, so what are they learning? Our time and energy working to improve what our children watch, not just how much they watch, can have a positive impact on their behavior. There's a shift from the screen time, just how many minutes matter versus what are they doing while they're on the screen matter. And I think that's an important shift for us to pay attention to. Context and relevancy matter. Playful learning with digital media. Media shapes cognitive and affective environment for learning, as do children shaped media. Again, children learn in active environments. They learn best when they're engaged. They learn in meaningful context. They learn best in social context. Media is family-based. Parent and family media use impacts children's media use. We know the number one impact on how children view media is how their parents use media in front of them. And then again, these issues of diversity and understanding the complexity of human development. So here's a recipe for all of you as media makers. Combine research, theory, and practice. We started with Warren and Barbara talking about theory. We're talking about some research. Others are going to talk about research this morning. We have to know what we know. We have to continue to ask ourselves questions about what we don't know. We have to put that into practice. Stir in some opportunities for interactions and relationships. If this is the key, then don't leave it out of the recipe. Blend in joint engagement with media. Whenever possible, prompt that opportunity for an adult and a child to have an experience together. Prompt the opportunity for two children to have the experience together. It's a multi-touch screen. Let's get lots of little fingers on that. Fold in the 3 C's of quality media for children, right? So context, content, and the child. Mixed in the active ingredients that we talked about. Bake in your understanding of the reciprocal influence of parents, families, cultures, and community on children's media use. Reciprocal, it goes both ways. And top with digital media literacy for parents, children, educators, and young children. I want to say to you how important I think that is and what a role you play. Digital media literacy isn't something we learn off of the media. It's what we learn while we're using your media, the media that you create. So bake it into the recipe. Help me understand how to use media, what's good media, how to make choices about the way I use media. That's very powerful. And let me end with this reflection and reminder from Lisa Guernsey. An overarching theme of the day, brought forward by researcher after researcher, was the importance of making distinctions between mindful versus mindless media use. Mindful or mindless, the choice is ours. When digital media, whether ebooks or television shows, are used intentionally and designed with children's learning in mind, they can promote children's learning, or they cannot. When used mindlessly, one example was always on television. We talked a lot about the negative impact of background TV. Media could distract children from important play patterns and social interactions that help them develop social, emotional, cognitive skills and habits of mind. My big takeaway from the day, David was there as well, we talked about this. We have 40 years of amazing research into media and young children, and it's almost all television-based. It's about the interaction of one child watching one screen in a passive environment. What does that tell us about all these devices we've been playing with these last few days? Not much yet, so there's a lot we still have to learn. So thank you for your attention.
Don't you wander off, Doctor. That was a machine gun run through a lot of big ideas. So let's just ask him a couple of questions while we do. We have a demo setting up, actually a rather historic demo. Chip? Any questions?
I know we're still very early in the co-play joint media engagement research world. Do you know of any new research that shows the effectiveness of co-play? Can you talk a little bit about it?
I think the research evidence is coming. I think the intuitive, it makes total sense. Evidence is there already. The anecdotal evidence. We know that this makes sense. This is so obvious. I would argue as an academician that good research proves the obvious, right? And this one's obvious. Right, and so it's coming. Warren posted a link to a whole collection of research that I shared on a Google Drive with all of you. And inside of that folder is also one document that's loaded with links to other stuff. So start clicking around. I think again the realization from the event was, boy, we have a lot we still need to learn, but some of the most interesting questions that are bubbling up are around this. And there's a great connection between what early childhood people know about social context and what we're learning about media.
Chip, there are hints at it in the new research with Skype versus video.
Yeah, so we're starting to see that, again, there's that socially contingent interactions, right, from the research around how children can learn from screens when, in fact, the relationship is embedded in that process.
That was fantastic, thanks. I'm wondering if that particular presentation is also available in the packet or online anywhere in the slide.
Yeah, it will be. I'll put it in the packet as well. Thanks.
And what's an academician?
That's someone who spends a lot of time thinking grand thoughts and not accomplishing much.
I want to be one of those.
Chip, also in addition to Bob's question about it being just having your slide deck, which would be awesome, is the summary of these reports being published in more of a formal report? Because you mentioned several individual reports, but is there anything you've been done with the summary yet?
Yeah, Lisa and the New America Alliance will be publishing some things. David Kleeman has a blog coming out soon with some comments from all of this. I think what the other takeaway I had, because my work is with early childhood educators, is none of this is filtering down to the teachers. Right? So this is good stuff. This is important. I think a teacher of young children might actually feel differently about media use in the classroom if we really start to understand relationships, because that's what we're all about. Right? And so how do we make sure that this information gets to teachers in a way that's actionable? How do we make sure it gets to all of you in a way that helps you really think hard about what you're building?
Right. Has there been any research comparing learning through parasocial relationships, like through a character, versus through an actual, like learning from grandma? So this is how you learn from woo-woo-whoopsie, talking, with this particular goal in mind. And here's the same thing as taught by someone they actually know, maybe via the media.
Yeah, I don't know of any. Yeah, go ahead.
That was one of the questions.
There are a couple of classic studies. One of them back in the 80s where, based on TV, little kids do not learn from a model on the TV. But the research was done classically where, with one trial, kids in a lab watching something for 30 seconds, and lo and behold, the kid can't do it. There's now a new study that's probably a few years old, wherein with repeated exposure, there's no difference between coming off the screen, assuming that the pedagogy is there, or coming from a live model. So that's the really interesting thing. A lot of the research does not reflect the reality of a good instructional model. So
Do you know what that study was? Do you know who did that study?
you know what? I can go back into my mental Rolodex, but not right now.
And wouldn't it be cool if like Elmo was your grandmother and you got both?
It's just, so that was one of the questions that came up at this forum, was research to be done includes the relationship between the child and whether it's a parasocial relationship, whether it's an actual relationship, and especially in the digital space, the differences of a character, how you create that kind of emotional bond.
I'm getting the move on signal, right? MoveOn.org. Carry on this conversation later, guys. Sounds good. All right, thanks, Jay.